We do begin tonight with the president signing into law a $600 million bill to increase security along the U.S.-Mexico border. It's an effort to toughen border enforcement, even though, as Mr. Obama's Homeland Security Secretary pointed out today, the fact is that the problem of illegal immigration, as reflected in immigration enforcement, the problem hasn't actually gotten any worse over the last decade.
Everything that is supposed to be going up is going up, and everything that is supposed to be going down is going down. Seizures are up and rose across the board last year. Apprehensions or illegal crossings are down.
It is sort of taboo to say these days. It's at least against the common wisdom. But the illegal immigration problem in America is not actually getting worse. It's just that the people who like to say it's getting worse, despite the facts, are complaining about it a lot louder now. And as their complaints get louder and louder and louder, despite the facts, their complaints are starting to get stranger, too. In our newsroom here at our offices, I can't watch it because I'm really, really easily visually distracted. What? But everybody else who works on the Rachael Maddow show, everybody else who works like in our little newsroom hub, always has all of the other cable networks on during the day to monitor the news. I don't, but I'm easily distracted. And I was walking past one of our banks of monitors one day this week, and I just stopped dead in my tracks in front of this on CNN. Terror babies! That was the topic of discussion on Anderson Cooper's CNN show last night. Terrorist babies. Really? Hats off to Mr. Cooper, actually, for discussing and debunking this conspiracy theory. But the theory itself is amazing. The idea is that very far-sighted terrorist foreign ladies are coming to America to have babies here. Why are they doing that? They're doing that to get their terrorist spawn born in America, so that the terrorist baby will be born as a U.S. citizen. Then the terrorist baby will toddle home and be raised as a terrorist toddler, and then a terrorist child, and then a terrorist teenager, and so on. And eventually it will come back over here 20 or so years later and use its terrorist baby American passport to enter our country and carry out terrorist attacks. Ta-da! These very, very far-sighted terrorist uterus-wielding ladies are not apparently supposed to be terrorists themselves. They are just terrorist baby incubators. They are terrorist baby mamas. As far-fetched as the terrorist babies theory may seem. I know, right? It's the latest anti-immigration point of hysteria on the right. And I do, again, hats off to Anderson Cooper. He ably debunked this. But nevertheless, the terrorist baby theory is still being given a voice on the floor of Congress.
They would have young women who became pregnant, would get them into the United States to have a baby. They wouldn't even have to pay anything for the baby. And then they would return back where they could be raised and coddled as future terrorists. And then one day, 20, 30 years down the road, they could be sent in to help destroy our way of life.
See, you thought I was exaggerating. You thought that I was using hyperbole. I was making it sound more kooky than it is. When Louis Gohmert says it, he actually makes it sound more crazy than me paraphrasing it. They wouldn't even have to pay anything for the baby, he says. Then they would return back where they could be raised and coddled as future terrorists. Terrorist babies. Sure, they look like babies. Clearly, we have to repeal the 14th Amendment. So babies born here, any babies, are no longer U.S. citizens to protect us from the terrorist babies. It's amazing. You know, fear is a tried and true political strategy, scaring people about foreign threats, the threats posed to you in your way of life by people who look different than you, no matter how tiny those people are. It is a well-worn strategy in conservative politics to stoke fear like this. The problem is that trying to scare the electorate about immigrants in particular is always a tempting strategy for conservatives, but it never really pays off. At least it doesn't anymore. It doesn't seem to work that well anymore, electorally speaking. And that's because demographically, it's dumb. In 2004, exit polls showed that a whopping 44% of Hispanics cast their ballots for Republicans. 2 years later, when the anti-immigration rhetoric got too tempting again for conservative politicians, when the anti-immigrant be afraid stuff got ratcheted back up, that number cratered to 29%. Republicans managed to make up a little ground in 2008, taking 31% of the Hispanic vote. But any white voters that Republicans picked up from the be afraid of the scary brown people strategy, they were not enough to prevent a huge drubbing for the Republican Party that year. Now, the people who are trying to scare white people for political gain aren't strategically stupid. I mean, they've seen these numbers, too. Anti-immigrant politicking feels good to a party that likes to run on fear, but anybody can tell it doesn't work. Just ask President Tancredo. Smart Republicans know how to read these numbers. This is not a mystery. You will hear smart Republicans articulate that same phenomenon that I just described. Republicans know this, but so how come they keep going back to the anti-immigrant stuff in election years? What else could be driving them to these harsh anti-immigration policies, despite their best electoral interests? Well, last night on this show, we talked about how one of the unheralded direct impacts of Arizona's Papers, Please law is that it would have, in all likelihood, put millions of dollars per month into the hands of the private prison industry, specifically a private prison company called the Corrections Corporation of America. CCA holds the contract to imprison federal detainees in Arizona. How do you get to be a federal detainee in Arizona? Well, when you're picked up in Arizona and you get detained on an immigration charge, that means you get sent to a CCA prison, which is a for-profit entity that gets paid by the government to hold you. CCA could potentially reap huge financial benefits from Arizona Governor Jan Brewer signing SB 1070, since 1070 was designed to lock up a lot more people in Arizona on federal immigration charges. Cha-ching! And that is really convenient given that 2 of Governor Brewer's top advisors have direct connections to the Corrections Corporation of America. As the CBS affiliate KPHO first reported, and we talked about last night, Governor Brewer's deputy chief of staff used to be a lobbyist for CCA. His wife is currently a registered lobbyist for CCA. Also, one of Governor Brewer's policy advisors, the man who runs her campaigns, owns a firm that represents CCA. So Governor Brewer signing SB 1070 into law, which again would result in more immigrants being arrested and detained, potentially benefiting this prison company linked to a pair of her advisors in a very big way. Now it turns out there is an even more direct link between SB 1070 and the private prison industry, which stands to benefit from SB 1070. Do you remember who introduced SB 1070 in the first place? Somewhere deep in your memory bank on this issue is the name Russell Pierce. He's the Republican state senator in Arizona who pushed through SB 1070. It was really his baby. Russell Pierce is chairman of the Senate Appropriations Committee in Arizona. He's a powerful guy in the state legislature. And his connections to the industry that is licking its chops at the prospect of more arrested immigrants and therefore more profit in Arizona, his connections to that industry are even more stark than those of Jan Brewer. Joining us now to explain is the reporter who's been doing much of the legwork on this story, Morgan Lowe, with the CBS affiliate in Phoenix, KPHO. Morgan, thanks very much for coming back on the show.
Rachel, it's my pleasure.
I think people nationally connect SB 1070 with the governor of Arizona, Jan Brewer, but what is the connection between Russell Pierce and SB 1070?
The idea behind SB 1070 is something Russell Pierce has been thinking about for years. In fact, in 2006, he introduced for the first time a bill that would make it a state crime for an illegal immigrant to be in Arizona. Back in 2006, that actually passed our state legislature, but then Governor Janet Napolitano vetoed it. This time around, he had a Republican governor, one who was apparently looking for a big issue. Immigration became a big issue in Arizona a few months ago, even bigger than it had been before. She signed it into law, increasing her popularity among Arizona residents and making Russell Pierce even more powerful.
We talked about Governor Brewer's connections to the private prison industry, specifically to Corrections Corporation of America last night. What are Russell Pierce's financial connections to that industry?
We just looked through his financial reporting sheets this afternoon, and he enjoys support from the private prison industry. The political action committees funded by the 2 private prisons that have contracts with the state of Arizona have both donated in the last year the maximum amount allowable to Russell Pierce. He's also made money from the lobbyists who work for those companies as well as the other private prison industries, businesses out there. And the thing that's funny about Russell Pierce is he's running for re-election. He could get re-elected without spending a dollar. He's become so popular, so he's sitting on about $73,000 in his campaign war chest, money he really doesn't even need to use.
As I understand it, Mr. Pierce, looking ahead at this point, has a far political horizon. He's not just looking toward his next reelection. He seems to be a relatively ambitious political figure in Arizona. Given that war chest, given the expected ease of his reelection effort, Morgan, is there an indication of what Russell Pierce plans to do next on this issue?
Well, after he successfully passed SB 1070, we looked through about 2 months of his emails. He's a public official. We had a right to look through his state email account. And in it, we started seeing a pattern of an initiative that he is planning to push forward, and that is this birthright citizenship, abolishing, the 14th Amendment movement that you referred to earlier in your presentation. His idea is to enact a bill in Arizona that would deny children born to illegal immigrants birth certificates for Arizona. That is something he plans to push potentially next year. Who knows what he's going to use that money for, but he's got money he could use to push the issues that he's looking toward.
Morgan, am I also right that in thinking that Russell Pierce was the man behind the effort last year to privatize all of Arizona's state prisons?
He was. He sponsored that legislation, and we looked through his legislative record, and it looks like as far back as 2003 he was pushing legislation that was calling for the privatization of state prison beds. I think 1,000 beds back in 2003, another 1,400 before that. But the biggest one is the bill that you just referred to, which would have handed over our entire prison system to the private prison industry. Now, that bill was vetoed, but another bill passed that essentially did the same thing. Last year, our prison system would have, in a sense, most of it would have been handed over to the private prison industry, but none of those companies would come forward to bid on them.
Wow. Morgan Lowe, investigative reporter with the CBS affiliate KPHO in Phoenix, Arizona. Thank you for your reporting and for your time and helping us connect these dots at the national level, Morgan. Really appreciate it.
Rachel, it's my pleasure.